And today we're excited to cover a topic that we haven't talked about previously on one of our coffee talk sessions, bank fee analysis. And I think this is, we consistently see this as a top 5 topic for Treasury, if not top 3. It's even gaining additional traction as we move into 2024 here. Obviously, it's a big line item expense for Treasury. It gets a lot of attention around budget season, and it's in general not an easy thing for Treasury to get their arms around. We hear, consistently a lot of challenges sort of obscuring this process for corporates in terms of lack of standardization around how fees are reported. Lack of transparency over exactly what you're paying for, what line items on your bank fee analysis even relates back to, inconsistencies in formats and reporting structures between banks that make it hard to compare like to like between different bank relationships, and just overall difficulty in terms of benchmarking what you pay for your fees in comparison to your peers and understanding whether or not that's competitive. So today we're going to talk through all of these challenges and also some strategies to gain a better handle on your bank fee analysis process and hopefully drive more efficiencies into that process overall on a go-forward basis. To help me with this conversation, very excited to have Jacob Nygren here from Curinos, who's the principal product manager for their in-depth bank fee analysis product. So obviously somebody who has a lot of experience with this topic and can lend a lot to the conversation here. So Jacob, welcome, and maybe you could just take a moment here to introduce yourself as well.
Great. Yeah, thank you, John, and thank you, TIS, for hosting this this conversation. Very important topic and especially timely right now. If folks aren't paying attention to bank fees right now, they likely will be when the January statements start coming through and they start seeing those 2024 annual fee increases out there. But so yeah, as Jonathan mentioned, Jacob Nygren, the principal product manager at Curinos, specifically within the Treasury Strategies division. So a little bit about our organization. Curinos is a large fintech company, and Treasury Strategies is a division of Curinos. Now, the Treasury Strategies part of the organization, it's been around for over 40 years, continuing to consult to corporate treasuries in the area of payments, liquidity, fee management, and technology. And we continue to deliver this work today under the guidance of Paul LaRock, who leads that particular group. And now what we're here to talk about is our own technology solution, which is end up in the bank fee analysis portion of that. And so, we're really happy to partner with TIS in this effort and offer kind of the full-featured premium suite of the end-up solution, which TIS customers can really adopt to manage their own bank relationships, and with the added benefit of having TIS as the connectivity hub for those automatic file transmissions and transmitting those files directly from the bank into the end-up solution. So really happy to be here and happy to announce this partnership to the world.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jacob. Yeah, as Jacob alluded to, this is the other reason for the coffee talk session here today. What's really making it possible is the partnership between TIS and Curinos, which has just recently been announced. So we're also excited on the TIS side to bring that solution to our customers. Obviously, we've done a lot over the years to help our customers with liquidity, cash flow, and payments, giving our customers visibility over how they make payments. Now they can drive savings around, those payment instruments that they use. Also visibility around how they use their bank relationships globally and maybe some efficiencies they can pick up from that standpoint. But this really brings it all together in terms of the fee analysis data and helping our customers really understand what they're paying for bank service charges and how to get more optimized from this standpoint. So really natural partnership and something that we're definitely very excited to bring to our customers as well. As we move into our discussion points today for today's coffee talk session, maybe we can start with just sort of a high-level kind of question here, in terms of, are there any important trends that really are bringing bank fee analysis into focus for corporates going into 2024? Maybe those are macroeconomic trends or something that's going on with the bank relationships. But Jacob, anything you're seeing on your side related to, topics at banks that are sort of bringing this into focus for corporates?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really one of the big factors driving the attention on bank fee analysis today comes from the higher rates that we're seeing in the marketplace. And really that's driving a lot of significant change for company treasurers and for banks. And really we expect that to be true even if the Fed does, apply some cuts a couple of times throughout the year. There's still enough of a delta between the available options out there, and really that's kind of manifesting some change for corporate treasurers in the way of spending more time kind of working on optimizing cash forecasting, cash conversion cycle to free up cash in order to invest, or perhaps use it to pay down debt. But then also working on optimizing the return on cash, both through savings rates, investments, but also check deposits. So this includes looking at ECRs, making an informed decision in terms of whether to keep using balances to offset fees or whether to pay fees out of pocket, and get that hard dollar interest and cash return on the checking account. And so, yeah, it really is kind of a unique environment that we find ourselves in. I think the big difference now is that, in this particular increased rate cycle is that since 2008, we're now in a post-Reg Q environment, at least, in the US. Most of the international community is kind of way ahead at this point, but in the US, kind of catching up to this post-Reg Q environment, meaning that interest-bearing demand deposit accounts are a viable option for these US deposits. And you kind of couple that with the fact that the last 15 years, there really hasn't been much attention to like hardcore balance management, just because rates have been so low. And so you even got a new generation of Treasury folks that have never worked in this kind of rate environment. And so that's kind of factoring in here as well. I think kind of between 2008 and 2022, a lot of times there's very little reason to move from, ECR based DDA accounts. And now, we see differentials where you might be able to get 150 basis points on an ECR, but meanwhile, interest-bearing DDA can be yielding 450 to 500 basis points or more. And so that there is kind of more of that shift in attention from traditional ECR into interest-bearing DDA. And if I can maybe just spend just another moment, I think one other factor here to keep in mind as a corporate treasurer is that banks are also feeling the squeeze as well. These higher deposit costs kind of across all segments, business, consumer, commercial, as well as higher regulatory costs. Some of the earlier bank failures earlier in the year, led to some additional assessments for the FDIC to recoup costs. And to really tie this all together, that squeeze on banks, well, one of the ways that they're looking to recover those costs and keep their profit margins is through increasing fees. And so I think that the big message here is, that there are a lot of factors coming together at this current point in time. And if you're in corporate treasury, you don't want to be asleep at the wheel. There are meaningful opportunity costs of inaction, of doing nothing and maintaining the status quo. And so it really is something that folks need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, I think that's completely in line with what we're hearing from our customers as well. This is a whole new rate environment for most corporate treasury departments, but they're really thinking about the best use of that idle cash, excess cash, whether it's just to offset bank fees in the accounts or, leveraging some sort of a short-term cash investment product. And the trend, it seems like it's been, we actually referenced a Deloitte study in one of our recent fact sheets that says the same exact thing. The banks are going to be looking to increase revenue. 2024, one of the years they're going to be looking to do that is in fees. So obviously a lot of corporates out there expecting those price increases to be passed through soon. And as you alluded to, are probably curious about those January fee statements, how that's going to look in comparison to last year, which, from what we heard, was relatively stable from a fee standpoint. So definitely a couple of things that are bringing this big time into the attention of the corporate treasurers, going into 2024. Talking about maybe. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, you had this period of time around the time of the pandemic where banks didn't really want to be increasing fees and passing fee increases on. They didn't want to be seen as gouging clients during that time. And so kind of as we've come out of the pandemic, they're looking to make up the cost, but then you couple that with, rising inflation and now the higher rate environment, that really is creating a bit of a perfect storm for, substantial fee increases. And so it really is timely for folks to be paying attention.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And on the flip side of things, as I'd kind of alluded to in my introduction, this is not an easy thing for most treasury departments to tackle. It seems like historically, really being able to get visibility around your fees, benchmark your fees, really understanding, normalization of, charges like account maintenance charges, transaction charges, reporting charges across different banks. But maybe you could talk through some of the sort of quintessential challenges that companies are typically facing when they're trying to analyze their bank fee analysis statements.
Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of challenges that go into it, and I think that's kind of led to, this I don't want to say this culture, but this practice of a lot of times, folks would just kind of accept bank fees as they were, maybe look at last month's statement, compare it to the current month, and all right, are they off by a lot or not? And then just kind of move on about the day. But really, if we consider kind of the magnitude of bank fees for a typical corporate treasury department, I mean, that can be a substantial portion, if not one of the largest portions of the overall treasury budget in a current year. And so, as we sought to bring EndUp to market, we wanted to solve some of these quintessential challenges. And I think, if we go through what some of the challenges are, one of the biggest challenges upfront is, especially if you have multiple bank relationships and different relationships around the globe, is actually first getting visibility. Can you get the account analysis statements from your banks? And usually, we can accomplish that if folks are kind of working with modern commercial banks. But let's say now you get your account analysis statements, then you've got the issue of challenging formats. So, if anyone who's listening to the recording has ever tried to look at like an EDI 822 statement or a TWIST BSB CAMT 86 statement, they're designed to be machine readable, but they're somewhat difficult to digest, in a human readable form. And so those are two machine readable formats. And on the flip side, you've got PDFs, which are notoriously difficult to extract data from. And so, we've got kind of these multitude of different formats that really produce a number of challenges. And quick sidebar, EndUp will take in all of those formats. And, so I think that's one of the challenges that we're helping to solve. But then you've also, so let's say you've got your statements in, to go through and look through multiple pages of account analysis statements across multiple banks. I mean, we've seen account analysis statements just from a single bank in a single month that can be 500, 1,000, 2,000 pages in length. And that's just one bank in one country, and you multiply that by multiple banks and regions around the globe, it can really get out of hand quickly, and that makes it all very time consuming and complex to be able to bring all this data together to synergize it. You've got the issue that no two banks charge for their services in the same way. They don't name their services consistently. They don't use AFP codes consistently, if they use them at all. They package and bundle their services together in different ways. And so, it really is a challenging element to get your hands around and really understand at a deep level. And once you do, you find yourself kind of going through this effort. Well, if you're doing it manually without some kind of technology, you end up spending all your time just building the analysis and then not left with any time on the back end to actually act and take action. And so really, these are some of the fundamental challenges that we've sought to solve with the EndUp product solution.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I spent some time, about 15 years in the treasury profession, and obviously every treasury department does bank fee analysis. It's a core function for everybody to do at least once a month, right? And we were kind of the same way, doing a lot of this in Excel, and it was exactly as you described it, just getting all that data, hundreds of pages of account analysis statement data into an Excel, and then having your model to have your lookup tables to check for price discrepancy or new charges and things like that. And then, you think you have everything working correctly, and then the bank goes and renames the service charge, or, takes one charge and splits it into 3 separate charges, and it breaks the whole thing. And so it does end up being a lot of maintenance, for just a very little bit of insight that you're actually getting here in terms of, sort of understanding what you're paying for fees. So obviously
catching a single mistake can make a massive, that can mean thousands of dollars over the course of the year, if not tens of thousands.
Yep. No, I agree completely. And, obviously those challenges are just, amplify when you talk about corporates that are multi-bank, like you mentioned before, right? Every bank sort of reports things differently. They have a different structure of how they, might reference their account maintenance charges or their, reporting or transaction fees. And then, what about multinational? I guess another
Yeah.
thing too. When you're talking about moving across borders here and analyzing statements between, banks in Europe versus banks in the U.S., that probably adds quite a bit of complexity as well. Maybe you could talk through like maybe the multinational aspect of it and sort of how that becomes another, point of where a lot of this process becomes obscured for corporate treasury departments.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, each of the challenges that I had mentioned previously, they kind of get exacerbated, sometimes even like exponentially on a global or multinational scale. You've got the difficulty in kind of achieving visibility and collecting statements more difficult on a global basis when you need to coordinate, perhaps if you've got a decentralized treasury, coordinate with different treasury groups on a global basis. Some banks may not produce an account analysis statement in some country. You're less likely to run into that with some of the large global commercial banks. It tends to be more common, I guess, amongst kind of the smaller banks and certain localities. But the majority of large commercial banks, you can get the account analysis statement in some form or fashion. In some ways, we have GE kind of 20, 30 years ago who kind of led the charge in enforcing banks to adopt account analysis statements and produce account analysis statements. And now we're all somewhat of the beneficiaries of that. But you've also got the issue of challenging formats, right? So while let's say you're in corporate treasury, you get your handle on one format of statements, and you've got your process set up. Well, now you start looking globally. Well, even within the same bank, they may have different formats by region, by country. And so it does kind of just grow as you look on a global basis, along with the differences in service descriptions. So it's not just, hey, did the bank change my service description and now they're just naming it something different per month, but on a global basis, different countries, different regions may actually just have completely different service descriptions and how they refer to their services. And then you've also got kind of the standard AFP codes versus the global AFP codes, which ones are they using? And so really, if you're trying to do it manually, it ends up just being way more time consuming as you've got more to review as you kind of build out to a global scale.
Yeah, and you mentioned, some organizations, multinational organizations have decentralized treasury operations, which means locally negotiated contracts. Who's keeping an eye on those? That lends more importance into just the benchmarking, the periodic benchmarking to understand, is what you're paying still competitive with the market? Because a lot of those contracts get set up and then they don't get looked at again for another 5+ years, right? And things change over that time where price increases are handed down to most companies, and obviously volumes increase, and maybe you have the a justification to negotiate more favorable rates, but it's just not on the top of people's minds to actually go out and do that. So
yeah, and really, I mean, it's helpful if folks can negotiate the entirety of the relationship. If you've got local negotiations in different parts of the world, the commercial banking space is an economies of scale driven business, right? So the more volume that you have and the more negotiating power that you have. And so that's where, when we're bringing folks on to end up, we advocate first, let's kind of get visibility and then negotiate kind of all your volume, negotiate at the relationship level, because that's going to get you the most bang for your buck and the most favorable pricing.
Yeah, no, that's a great strategy. It seems like more often than not, companies these days have some of these challenges. Most companies do have some sort of international operations, it seems like, and nearly all companies have at least a handful of bank relationships. Like if you have a credit facility, you probably have at least 3-4 banks that you're dividing up share wallet to and things like that. So everybody's kind of facing these complexities of normalizing these fees and negotiating based on all of your global volumes around all your subsidiaries and things like that too. So
yeah.
Maybe we could talk a bit too, and I know you talked about this a little bit, at the beginning of the conversation here, but obviously a big portion of the bank fee analysis statement is, in the U.S. it's ECR, or maybe it's the interest that you earn on your DDA, whatever it might be. But that balance that offsets those fees, right, is a big component. Obviously, it's a big thing to monitor, and also a big thing to consider in your negotiations, because it can have a meaningful impact on reducing what you're paying net to the banks. But, is this an easy concept, you think, for corporates to get their arms around, or, just ECR in general, understanding what you're really getting for an earnings credit on your statement, considering other charges that might be kind of offsetting that or other costs of holding those balances in place? Is there a good way for corporates to kind of think that one through and really understand what they're really getting from benefit for holding those balances in their accounts?
Yeah, it certainly is complex. When we think of ECR, so one of the nice things is that, if you are on accounts where you're getting earnings credits, it's quite common to have those earnings credits reported on your account analysis statement. Now, if you're getting hard dollar interest, it's a bit hit or miss as to whether or not that's reported on the statement. But one of the nice things with NDEP is if it's there, we pick it up and report it back. But that's just the compensation for the balances. Now, it's made even more complicated when you factor in the reality that banks also, in addition to compensating you for your balances, they also charge you for holding your balances there, which is something that a lot of folks don't realize. It certainly is quite prevalent in the US. We've seen some instances of it happening on a global scale as well. And so, the fact that you've got these balance assessment charges, the banks it all originated out of the FDIC fees in 2008, but those were a temporary, assessment that the FDIC charged. And in fact, the FDIC issued guidance saying to banks, hey, you can't call these FDIC fees anymore because we're not charging it to you. And so the banks now kind of still have these balance-based charges. They come in a number of different forms. It's balance assessment, regulatory recovery, recoupment, all different kinds of names, but it's essentially a charge the bank applies based on the balances that you hold. And so one of the nice things that we do is we actually net out and show you the net result. So yes, you're getting compensated in the form of interest and or earnings credits, but you're also getting charged. So let's net the two and see on a net effective basis, what kind of value are you actually getting from holding your deposits? And, in today's competitive rate environment, that net effective is really the one that you want to be paying attention to, because if yield is at all factoring into your decisions, and you're looking at like money market mutual funds or sweeps and things like that to place your cash on an overnight basis, really kind of making sure that you're maximizing the yield while also taking into account all the other liquidity and concerns and things like that as well. So the good news is we've got a solution for that, and it's presented just in black and white for our clients.
Yeah, that's a huge benefit, because obviously Treasury wants to get their arms around that, with everybody's focus on use of their idle cash and excess cash, the way things are today. And even, some corporates are in the advantageous position of probably having higher balances than they need to offset their bank charges. So maybe they want to split that up a little bit between, offsetting charges, then investing excess cash in some sort of money market or short-term investment. But they really want to understand what that net effective rate is going to be. And, at the end of the day, if it's going to completely offset those fees in their accounts. So, definitely a good thing for corporates to keep in mind. The other thing that I think most corporates struggle with, and everybody really wants to get their arms around, is, is what I'm paying actually competitive with my peers? What should I be paying? Because that's sort of a point that's obscured for a lot of different corporates too. Like, there's typically no real good way to get at that data. I remember, back in my Treasury days, you could buy data sets from some of the industries out there and be able to compare against sort of like, a baseline of what, other companies might have been paying for similar charges. But it was never perfect, because you never knew if they were similar to you in size and, share of wallet with the bank and balances being held with the bank. And even some of those codes didn't match up perfectly. So it's a little bit of figuring out, hey, I think this is this charge, and maybe this is what I should be paying here. But I guess, how has the benchmarking of fees sort of progressed, and what are some new strategies that corporates can use to benchmark their fees against their peers these days?
Yeah, great question. And I think one of the main factors, like I mentioned a little earlier, commercial banking is an economies of scale driven business. And so the more you have in volume, typically the more favorable pricing that you can expect from your bank. When we think of tying it back to the balance conversation, the more you have in balances, typically the more favorable rates you can expect. And so one of the strategies that we employ is by reflecting benchmarks as volume-based curves. So you can actually go in and the system will kind of plot out where your specific price points are, either in terms of fee pricing or what you're receiving in terms of earnings or net effective rates, plotted out relative to the benchmark curves, and you can see, where does my current pricing fall relative to other organizations that have similar volume levels to me. And that's really, that's the true mark of knowing kind of, is this really applicable to my organization? We get asked all the time, well, how do I know? I'm a very large company. We got massive volumes. How do we know we're going to be comparable? Or, how do I know that, like, what's the underlying set of clientele? With in-depth, we've got over 400 clients utilizing the platform each and every month, and so we're updating and updating those benchmarks on a regular basis. In addition to it being a bank fee analysis tool, it's inherently also a benchmarking tool. So you both contribute to and receive the benefit of the benchmarks. We only utilize the data in an aggregated, anonymized way, of course, to protect confidentiality. So I think the volume-based curves, is, to answer your question, is really one of the main elements. But then, we also think on the fee side, there are inherent difficulties in comparing pricing because, as I mentioned, no two banks charge for their services in the same way. They package and bundle their services together in different ways. And I use this example from time to time where, let's consider you've got Bank A and they're charging you $12 per inbound or outbound domestic wire. Meanwhile, Bank B charges you $15 per inbound or outbound wire. Okay, well, on the surface, if you're just comparing line items, looks like Bank A is the better deal, right? But what if Bank A also charges you a wire maintenance charge, wire confirmation charge, template storage charge, and Bank B doesn't add in all those services? On an all-in basis, you might actually be paying more at the bank that had the $12 per item charge because we add in those additional fees. And so we do something really unique within in-depth is we do our benchmarking on an all-in basis. So, what are you paying all in per inbound or outbound wire, per low value ACH, SEPA transaction, checked in and out, and those types of things. And really, once you've got it at that level, it's no longer apples to oranges. I like to say we're just comparing one basket of fruit to another. It's much more comparable at that level. And so benchmarking at that level can really help lead to more productive conversations with your banks and discussing, kind of how you sit relative to benchmarks.
Yeah, that sounds like a huge benefit to corporate treasury. And I have to imagine when most companies boot up the solution for the first time, that's probably the data point that they're most interested in, is that all-in pricing benchmarking. I'd be really curious to see, probably what that was for some of the companies I worked for previously. But then probably good on a year-over-year basis too. Like, as your volumes increase and you jump into a different tier of, say, share wallet with that bank, or your business increases substantially, just knowing when it's time to go back to the table, and maybe you have opportunities to renegotiate fees and things. So you can kind of use it like on an ongoing basis as part of your analysis process, like continuously. So
yeah, absolutely. Those fees are changing all the time. And so, I think one other important element to understand is that cross-bank mapping and understanding those different, how those different services come together in the form of all-in pricing. That's inherent to the tool, and that's not something that our clients need to manage themselves. So the bank changes the name of the service. Our end clients don't have to do anything about that. Essentially, the way that it works is we've got a shared kind of default mapping that applies to all of our clients. So the first time we encounter a new service from a new institution, my team gets a notification. We go in there and map it. It is then mapped for any time that any of our clients have that service at that bank. And so, in terms of just kind of ongoing maintenance of the system, it really makes it an easy system and to use and maintain it on an ongoing basis. And the fact that those all-in comparisons are already there without having to do anything or go through any prolonged implementation process, I think is really compelling. I mean, we get folks up and running in a matter of, hours, days, minutes versus, months, weeks, years, right? So it really
Yeah.
is something that folks can benefit from.
That's a huge, huge benefit. Kind of leads me into my next question too, around, ROI. One thing I really like about the bank fee analysis solution is there's a real tangible ROI, and I think obviously the listeners can probably see that from just the benchmarking and the normalization of fees and things like that you gain. As soon as you get this visibility over what you're paying and how that looks like in comparison to your peers or just bank to bank, you're suddenly have so much more control over how to drive those costs within your organizations. But maybe from that standpoint, obviously it's a quick solution to implement, but what are some of the quick wins, I guess, you typically see customers achieve after they've implemented the solution?
Great question. So, I think once folks kind of get the initial visibility, I mean, the quick wins come from kind of a handful of areas, and obviously it's the kind of topic where the deeper you go, the more you can find. In a lot of cases, I mean, we see folks kind of regularly recognize a overall annual reduction of between 10 and 15% of their annual spend on bank fees. So, I mean, it can be pretty substantial return. And so, in terms of the quick wins, I think one of the main things that we see, if you have excess earnings allowance, if you're getting earnings credits and you've got excess earnings allowance, in the vast majority of cases, those earnings credits don't roll over to a subsequent period. So it essentially means that you've got a portion of your balances that were effectively unutilized and earning you nothing for the period. And as we already talked about in the current rate environment, the opportunity cost of those balances having earnings, I mean, can be meaningful and substantial. One of the other elements also is when folks look at the net effective rates and actually see kind of what are they getting on a net effective basis. We don't see it as much anymore now that rates have gone up, but in some cases, clients do look and see that even in today's rate environment, they may still be getting a negative net effective rate of return. And so what I mean by that is that the balance assessment fee exceeds any compensation that they're getting in the form of earnings credits or interest. And in today's rate environment, that should be a no-go, right? There should be no scenario in which that is, the case for a company. So those are two main areas. I mean, the next level down is if you look at some other quick wins. If you see that your pricing differs wildly from the benchmarking, that can be indicative of either suboptimal pricing from the bank, or it could be poor service usage. The number of account analysis statements where I see that a company is still getting physical CDs, compact discs mailed to them, or getting faxes. I mean, my laptop, I don't even think my laptop has a compact disc reader anymore, but some organizations are still getting data in that manner. And the banks penalty price them, that's an expensive service. And so, it can be a combination of suboptimal pricing, poor service usage, duplicative services. The last piece I'll throw out there is really just kind of following in contract pricing. So if you're an organization, you go through the effort of doing a banking services RFP, soliciting bids from all the banks, comparing them, negotiating your services at a particular level. But then if you don't do the follow through to monitor and ensure that you're actually getting the pricing that was quoted, and that there aren't any kind of billing mistakes going forward, you could be leaving thousands, tens of thousands of dollars on the table, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so I think kind of managing and tracking to that contract pricing can be a huge area for savings as well.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, you sort of pat yourself on the back for negotiating good pricing, but then you don't follow through and make sure that you're actually receiving it monthly on the bank fee analysis statement. That makes a lot of sense, and that's something that definitely an automated solution can help with quite a bit. In my mind, maybe let's say ECR is like a potential quick win because, in my experience in a rising rate environment, that doesn't necessarily translate to the banks automatically increasing your ECR. You actually have to go out and ask for that. And it seems like in a lot of cases, obviously the banks want to keep those balances in-house. They're willing to raise that rate versus to see that go, externally to some sort of a money market fund or something like that. So obviously that could be a good place to get a quick win because you're negotiating one item versus multiple items on a charge basis to be able to get to sort of where you want to get to from a a fee reduction standpoint. So yeah, definitely a couple really good points there.
And you've also, even if you've got the contract pricing set up and you're comfortable that the bank has that in place, if you don't monitor it on an ongoing basis, like I mentioned, a lot of times each year, banks will go through their annual repricing event, and where they will reprice the entire portfolio. And it's not uncommon for, no malintent whatsoever, but sometimes your organization might get caught up in those portfolio-wide increases. Even if you have a 2 or 3 year pricing agreement, mistakes happen and these things happen. And the fact that if you're paying attention and can catch those, that could be substantial savings opportunity.
So maybe, as we kind of come to the end of the conversation here, and this kind of leaves the area of the software itself, but, obviously you're accumulating this data, and ultimately you're driving towards probably at some point like a fee renegotiation, right? With the arm of the data that you got in the benchmarking data, and understanding how your fees have increased over time and what other banks are charging you and things like that, right? So, and I don't know if you have any experience in terms of how often should corporates go out and renegotiate their bank fees? Or are there any strategies that you've seen work particularly well to actually go about that renegotiation process?
Yeah, I'd say general kind of rule of thumb is you look to do an RFP every 3 years or so, just to kind of make sure that you are utilizing the right services, right? Because technology changes, there are new solutions becoming available, that you still got competitive pricing for the marketplace and your current volume levels. So I'd say, generally every 3 year basis is typical. In terms of some of the successful strategies that we see employ, I'll give a bit of a self-promotional plug, partnering up with in-depth usage along with our Treasury strategies advisory team to help kind of issue and construct that RFP. Because you don't just want to issue an RFP for the current state and just replicate what you're doing today, but future state, so that you can implement some of those new products or improvements, apply fixes to broken or challenging existing Treasury processes. And so, I think that's one way in which kind of leveraging outside help can help in that effort, and making sure that you're moving the ball forward when you go through the effort, but also recognizing that most corporate treasury, you still got your day job to do as well. And so kind of having some extra hands to help can be beneficial in that standpoint. I'd also say that, by leveraging that approach, it's interesting because our team can also leverage the NDF benchmarks to not just compare proposals, what a bank proposes against current pricing, and compare the proposals against each other, but also how does that compare against the market and the overall industry benchmarks? That can be really, really helpful. And along those veins, I think just leveraging reliable benchmark data, another really important strategy when undertaking that effort. We talked about already, focus more on kind of all-in pricing rather than specific line item targets. In most cases, the goal here is to develop and foster a more productive relationship with your banks. They're credit partners. It's not necessarily to beat them over the head with the kind of pricing and mandate. I need this pricing on this particular line item, but are you getting a fair deal, right? It's a partnership, and really, I think as long as both sides kind of look at it and see that they're getting a fair deal, I mean, that's the most productive, valuable kind of business partnership and relationship, and of course tracking any variances once you've gone through the RFP effort as well. Yeah,
no, I agree with that completely. I mean, like you said, these are valuable business partners, right? So I've always found that a collaborative approach kind of works well, where you say, hey, we'll go through, we have a number that we need to hit, either based on budget guidance or maybe internal objectives, and we'll go through multiple different ways to be able to get there. We can do an internal evaluation, understand if there's services we don't actually need, we don't actually use, that we can turn off. Like you mentioned before, the CDs or something along those lines that maybe no one's even looking at when they actually come in the door. And then understanding where you might have the ability to negotiate a few of the more major pricing items, which obviously the Kierna solution, the index solution can help with quite a bit. And then the ECR rate or your interest rate or whatever it might be can be another component of that. But kind of bringing this all together in like a collaborative approach, like we'll do some work on our side, you do some work on your side, working towards like sort of a shared objective. That seems to be an approach I've seen work well, in some of these conversations too. So
Yeah, 100%. And having that collaborative approach rather than focusing on the individual line item. I mean, we see a lot where bankers may have more flexibility with certain particular line items than another. And so kind of leveraging that all-in approach and identifying kind of an overall target that you want to reach or a challenge that you want to address, that's going to be more productive than trying to just kind of force a square peg into a round hole on just nitpicking on a particular line item, when you may end up saving more through that collaborative approach. And we've seen plenty of instances where I think of one client in particular. They saw that their lockbox pricing was out of alignment. They brought it to the banker, and the banker said, yeah, you're right, here are a few changes we can make, get rid of some of these manual paper-based reporting that you still got, bring that back in line with the market. And the interesting thing is, in this scenario, both sides end up walking away with a win. Our corporate client got to say, hey, we reduced our bank fees and lockbox. And then what they actually did was they took those savings and rolled that out into a global payments solution with their bank. And so the banker got a win there as well.
Yeah.
And so it can be a win-win scenario.
Yeah. Good advice. Good advice. Yeah, and maybe just to wrap up here, I mean, any final words, topics we didn't cover, calls to action type items here? I mean, I know we covered a lot of ground during the course of this conversation, hit most of the major topics related to bank fee analysis, but anything just to sort of wrap up that maybe we didn't touch upon?
I think I'd just say, we're really excited about this partnership and the ability to kind of end up to a whole new audience and new set of clients. For our corporate practitioners who are listening, I'd say really, now is the time to act. As I mentioned at the start, even if there are multiple rate cuts throughout the year, there's still lots of opportunity to optimize balances. We're talking about hundreds of basis points differential in terms of opportunities. And so, you really don't want to be the corporate treasury that's asleep at the wheel. There are some major opportunity costs of inaction. Banks are raising fees. We know this. And if you haven't seen that already, likely you will over the next 30 days as those January statements roll in and banks have done their annual repricing events. And, lastly, just a failure to act or to monitor your fees now can lead to lead you at a detriment for years to come. If you can negotiate a 3% annual increase to your fees versus a 5%, multiply that over a couple of years, the cumulative compounding impact of having a 3% increase versus 5 can be really profound. And so, with that, I just say we're here to help in partnership with the TIS folks, and both NDEF and TIS, but then certainly the Treasury Strategies Advisory Team as well. So I really thank you all for the opportunity, for the time, and we appreciate the partnership and look forward to helping folks.
Yeah, sounds great. And we definitely agree with that completely. We're really excited to bring this solution to our clients as well. And certainly the industry research we've been reading supports those claims as well, that this is the time to act and this is the time to do something before corporates start to see those major fee increases during the course of 2024. So yeah, with that, we hope everybody enjoyed the session, and certainly if there's any questions afterwards, feel free to follow up with Jacob or myself. I think our contact information was presented a few times during the course of the presentation here today. But even so, feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn, message us there. And I know both of us are, more than willing to sort of engage in additional conversations on any of the topics that we covered here during the course of today's session. And Jacob, thanks again. This was amazing. We covered a ton of ground. You gave a lot of good insights. So, really appreciate you being on the Coffee Talk.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thanks to all the listeners. We hope we see you in the next one.